All right. For all of you listening, welcome to a special set for the BMZA Zoning Appeals Board. The case before you is, you would think that I would know that, BMZA 2021-161, 4903, 4905 York Road. As you just heard the board discuss, there's a lot of material here. They wish time to make sure that they give serious consideration to all the documents submitted, all the testimony raised. We have Miss Witt, who has represented York Road Partnership, that I'm going to make a panelist really quickly, and Mr. Neil Lanzi, the attorney for the for the property owner, the applicant, who I will also make a panelist quickly, Mr. Lanzi. So, Mr. Lanzi, if you could unmute yourself and we can discuss and review what the board has just discussed. Make sure that this works for you guys.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, great.
Okay.
Again, as you all just heard the chair state, a lot of information, and the board members really want to make sure they give due cause and consideration. There's no need for you guys to reappear, obviously, at either one of these. So it should not hopefully impact any kind of court schedule that you have or any kind of other hearing schedule that you have. It may impact your workload between now and the 5th. But what's being requested is legal memos from each of you summarizing essentially your positions, which would be due to me via email by close of business on Tuesday, October 5th. The board will then take 2 weeks to review, and then during their general meeting on October 19th, they will deliberate and vote.
Okay, sounds good.
That works for everybody?
My only comment is petitioner's exhibit 16 is we have filed a memorandum in support. So I guess I'll just file a supplemental memorandum in support to capture the entire case. And then as far as how it may affect today, I was intending to do a verbal closing. I'll try to shorten it up in light of the fact that we will be able to summarize in writing, if that helps.
Excellent.
Very well.
Okay, thank you both. And Becky, just to confirm, we did conclude with your last witness the last time, so now we were on to individual community testimony.
Yep.
Okay. All right, great. Sounds good. All right, I'm gonna bump you both back to attendee status. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to continue on with the announcements. Thank you all for attending this special hearing to wrap up the testimony in BMZA Appeal 2021-161. As you just heard, we're still in the opposition testimony portion of the hearing. We've concluded the York Road Partnership testimony. Now we're going to move on to individual testimony. I'm going to basically be rolling through each person as they come forward, and we can hear what you have to say. Again, it is up to the chair how long you have to speak. So James, would you like to make any kind of announcement regarding testimony?
Well, I'll just reiterate what we've said previously, is that to the extent we can avoid duplication of testimony, we would appreciate that. I know a lot of folks, particularly in the opposition, have similar concerns, many of which have already been addressed. And so, again, for the sake of time, it allows us to focus on the information, new information that we need to hear, that you want us to hear and take into consideration. We'd ask you to be respectful of that and not down upon what we've already heard. Thank you.
Other things to note: if you are having any issues with connecting or technical difficulties, please call our office 410-396-4301. We have people here to answer the phone. If you wish to testify either in support or opposition, as I said, I'm just going to roll through the list of attendees here. If you are a call-in user, you will hear 2 beeps. If you wish to speak, right now we're in opposition. If you wish to speak in opposition and you hear the 2 beeps, please speak right away before I move into the next caller. We had an email earlier from Mary Washington, and I don't see her here as an attendee. So Senator Washington, if you are here, if you could raise your hand or put a note in the chat, and we will call on you first, and then we will work through people essentially in alphabetical order. And Simon, I would ask that you just help me see if I'm missing anyone here.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, I don't see her here yet, so we'll try to get to her when we go there. Next person will be that we call on is Bill Miller. Mr. Miller, I've just unmuted you. Are you here in opposition, sir?
I am not here in opposition.
Okay,
I am with Vaughn Green Funeral Services.
excellent. Then I'm going to mute you, and you'll be the applicant will have the last word. All right, we're going to start with call-in users. Oh, here we go. Hold on. I see. Oh, there she is. All right. So I'm going to make Senator Washington a panelist. Senator Washington, you are unmuted and you're a panelist.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm not sure why I can't seem to get my video working, but
Welcome to the
it's
fun.
good to see. It's good to see you. You'd think after 18 months of this, but WebEx continues to challenge me. Thank you so much. I know that this is a difficult decision, a challenging decision, but a very important one. I appreciate the work that this board has done over the years to update our existing code, also to just do the business of the people of Baltimore City. And as a state senator representing Baltimore City and Annapolis, I don't take that. I rarely testify in hearings, respecting that somewhat that separation. But again, this is an opportunity where the interests conflate. And also, of course, I'm a resident of the 43rd District and live, in fact, not too far, from York Road. So for the record, I'm State Senator Mary Washington. I represent the 43rd District in Baltimore City. And I am testifying today in support of the numerous adjacent communities. I believe we are now upwards of 11 adjacent communities who have the position to not allow the installation of a human crematorium at Vaughn Green Funeral Services at their location of 4905 York Road in Baltimore City. Again, I am not taking this position lightly. I have a number of reasons. First, the site would have significant impacts on public health, business, and the residential and economic community. And again, it's this intersection of this is not only a business, so this is not just a traditional zoning hearing. We are also having a hearing about the future health of the public in the community and also what the residential economic mix will be. And I don't have to tell you that the purpose of our city zoning code is to promote and protect public health, its welfare, and the quality of life for current and future generations. Now, you know that Vaughn Green is located in an area that's zone C2, right? And there is a conditional use zone. So to ensure compatibility among neighboring residential, commercial, and entertainment uses, that's the purpose of that conditional use code. And although the code allows crematoriums to be co-located with funeral homes, the code also contains an absolute prohibition against incineration within city limits. Crematoriums are incinerators for human remains. So that's my first concern. Second, the code is intended as the minimum requirement for the promotion of public health, safety, and welfare. I know you take this responsibility seriously, and it specifies that where there's a conflict between two provisions in the code, the more restrictive code should govern. And I have heard overwhelmingly from the community around the site that this is not an appropriate location for a human crematorium. Now, along with the community, I consider this to be an environmental justice issue. So it's a public health issue, an environmental justice issue as well. And given that 90% of the residents immediately surrounding the site are Black and 44% of the children live below the poverty line, this is an environmental issue. The area of the York Road corridor is one of the starkest racial dividing lines in the state. We support local organizational efforts to invest in reversing the effects of generations of segregation and divestment. And in fact, it's so stark, depending on which side of York Road you live on, the life expectancy can vary as much as 20 years. While I support Vaughn Green as a business, while I support Vaughn Green certainly as a Black-owned business, and it is an important and valuable business in our community, I have legitimate and serious concerns about putting the crematorium at this location, and I don't see right off where it makes a good addition. Again, when you think about that they have the argument that this is a community commercial district, it's an extremely narrow one. It's surrounded by really densely packed residences of families and children, and seniors live, and some as close as 150 feet to the proposed crematorium. Now, again, the application, I have concerns that the application has indicated that they intend for potential of continuous operation of the crematorium at a rate of 175 pounds per hour. What we're doing here is putting another source of pollution. You know that there's a great deal of traffic that goes up and down the York Road corridor. There are buses and trucks. It's a state highway passing through our city and these communities. And so I guess in some, or just to continue to reiterate that I have health concerns, that Baltimore City is already struggling with elevated rates of childhood and adult asthma, which is as much as 20% in children and greater in that corridor, that corridor is itself a lead hotspot and an asthma hotspot. According to the permit, the incinerator plans to purchase, it doesn't have any additional pollution controls. And so these are the questions you have to ask. How will the additional airborne particulate matter emitted by a new crematorium hurt people with asthma and respiratory disease? How far will those particles spread? And in fact, the prevailing winds move from west to east, so the burden of any new pollution would be on the majority of Black and brown neighborhoods east of York Road. Mercury is a neurotoxin. So I have concerns about the effect of the children with developing nervous systems. This neurotoxin is emitted from a crematoria and has serious effects on our nervous system. Listen, the vision for that York Road is to invite more people to move in, to fill in some of the vacant businesses and housing. And again, this crematorium located here is inconsistent with that vision. And finally, while others that I value the presence of Vaughn Green Funeral Homes, I respect them. Fortunately, they have another location, which is a less densely populated area. And so I support the idea that we make sure that we are not supporting this. I strongly oppose it. I support the community's position that the permit to be located at the York Road branch is denied, and that further, should MDE provide a permit, that they ensure that there is more than 1,000 feet away from humans when it co-locates in those communities. So again, thank you so very much for this opportunity. I implore you to understand that this is a real opportunity where the city and the state can work together to ensure that we're improving public health in communities that have been historically affected by poor air quality. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay. All right. So Senator Washington, I'm going to put you back as an attendee. And now we will go back through. Essentially, we're going to start with call-in users. So
Katie, Sabrina, can you mute me?
I can.
Thank you.
Let me see. Where are you? You are muted. All right. Let's start. So we're going to start with call-in users. So if you are a call-in user and you are here to testify in opposition, if you hear two beeps, please speak up. Again, reminding what our chair has stated is that if you have any new information that you'd like to share that hasn't been heard before, please do so. Okay. Moving to the next call-in user. Moving to the next call-in user. Moving to the next call-in user.
The back of that, right?
Hello? Okay. Moving to the next call-in user. Moving to the next call-in user. Okay, I know Ms. Kinslow is with the applicant. Chelsea Baranowski, do you wish to speak in opposition? Okay. Moving down to Ms. Camp. Ms. Camp, do you wish to speak in opposition?
I spoke. I was at the hearing last time. The only thing I wanted to reiterate is exactly what the senator was speaking upon. It's 100 feet away from my home, and I consider that to be my neighbor. So I'm definitely continue to be in opposition.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Pontius? Okay. Mr. Senator?
For or against the good.
Okay. Mr. Bemis? Do you wish to testify? Great. Ms. Schmidt-Perkins, I think did you testify last time? Okay, all right, well, we're rolling right through. We're on the H's. Ms. Perry, do you wish to testify? Ms. Ferretti, do you wish to testify?
No, I'm actually here. I'm on staff for Delegate Maggie McIntosh. So I'm here just Delegate McIntosh is in Annapolis at a meeting today, but she is joined Senator Washington in absolute opposition.
Got it. Thank you. Jeff Barron, you wish to testify?
No, I'm with Vaughn Green.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Barron. Jeffrey Tompkins, do you wish to testify?
Yes.
Okay.
My only point is I agree wholeheartedly with Senator Washington, and the point that I would like to make is that it seems like a lot of the discourse in our society right now is focused on the balancing of individual liberty versus collective responsibility. I feel like this is a case where we really need to tip it towards the collective responsibility because we're talking about public health and the safety of our children. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Ms. Chu, do you wish to testify? Okay. Jonathan Roach, do you wish to testify?
I have nothing of substance to add, just that I'm a neighbor here and I'm in opposition of this incinerator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. Camp,
Opposed.
thank you. Lainey Scott Nelson?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yeah, okay. My name's Lane Scott Nelson. I'm a family nurse practitioner and primary care provider, and I've lived in Radnor, Winston for 7 years. I'm opposed to the crematorium. Anik Barker testified last week and referenced my letter, my opposition letter, saying that I could see the Von Green Funeral Home from my second-story bathroom, that my husband and I had talked about the pollution risks in the region before having children here in the area, and that this additional health burden would be too much for us to stay in the neighborhood. After listening to multiple sessions of testimonies, I am not reassured that it's safe to stay if the crematorium is approved. I have concerns about specifically the lack of regulatory accountability. I heard the good faith intentions by the defense that would promise less harm to the environment, but they are not the same as enforceable safety measures. For example, will the mercury containing teeth actually be removed? We don't have a way of knowing. Will the volume of cremated or incinerated items increase over time to exceed projected burn rates or maybe include medical waste? It would be within Mr. Von Green's rights if the crematorium is approved. And will emissions be monitored over time to account for changes secondary to aging equipment? I didn't hear that emissions would be monitored at all. So as I see it, there's no way the business and supposed community advantage of a crematorium at 4905 York Road can possibly balance out the real and lasting harm the air pollution can do to the community. Thank you to the board for all of your time.
Thank you. Muted, Katie.
All right, I'm gonna, Lila Growth, do you wish to testify?
Opposed.
Thank you. I'm gonna go back to Lee Barker because I think I was speaking when I tried to unmute Lee. Lee Barker, do you wish to testify?
No, I'm listening in with interest.
Thank you. Lila Kohler-Frey, do you wish to testify?
I'm opposed. I had previously submitted comments in a letter. There are two things I would like to mention, just having attended every meeting I possibly could in relation to this. The first is that just this continuing thread of what about the mercury? I do recognize that that the funeral home proposed that they would find a way to take it out, but having been to previous meetings, including the one with the Department of Environment, the very first meeting, I don't feel that that's been fully answered. It's certainly not in writing, and it sounded rather implausible and not in hand with what we had heard from the Power Pack company at that time. The second thing I'd like to note, and this really is, I do believe I'm speaking for certainly more people than myself, is I want to say for the record how incredibly heartbreaking this has been for community members. Community members do love the building establishment and the person of Von Green, and do understand, recognize, and have great admiration for how it is that he ferries people over and supports families for his ministry. And so that has made this part of the reason why it's been so difficult, because we want nothing more than for him to be supported and to be able to do the business he needs to do, just not here. So I wanted to note that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Polyak?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to add one comment that I thought was important that wasn't brought out in the testimony that we've had prior to today. So on the evening after the last date of testimony, Mr. Green attended a community meeting, I think it's the Northeast Community Organization, and there he revealed something that he didn't reveal in the 4 hours of testimony that preceded to the BMZA. And what he revealed to the small group of citizens at that meeting was that he intends to divert his cremation business from the other 3 funeral homes that he owns in the Baltimore area to the York Road site. And I wasn't sure if the board was aware of this because Mr. Green went to some length to state in testimony that he had no intention of accepting cremation work from private and third-party funeral homes, but he did not reveal to the board that he does intend to divert business from his own funeral homes, the ones in West Baltimore and the one in Baltimore County, to the York Road site if he is granted the zoning and the environmental permit to operate the incinerator there. So thank you for letting me add that additional bit of information.
Thank you. Mary Krasuski? Okay. Michael Treosh, do you wish to testify?
Good afternoon. I'm with Von Green.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Berry, do you wish to testify? Ms. Gilmore, do you wish to testify? Mr. King, do you wish to testify?
I'm attending on behalf of Von Green.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bathurst, are you here to testify in opposition?
No, I am here on behalf of Von Green.
Von Green, okay, thank you. Mr. Ringgold, do you wish to testify in opposition? All right, we have one more person. Ms. McFadden, do you wish to testify in opposition? Okay, I've just gone through all of the attendees and I've unmuted everyone and asked if they wish to testify in opposition. If you are logged in and I bypassed you or maybe clicked before you had an opportunity to say something, please either raise your hand now or put in the chat that you wish to testify in opposition. This is it. This will be the end of the opposition testimony and we will move toward rebuttal. So we'll give it a couple seconds to see if anybody raises a hand or puts anything in the chat. Simon, if you could also help me just monitor the list really quickly, see if I'm missing anything. Oh, I've got Mr. Pontius. All right. Mr. Pontius.
I just wanted to note that I'm the president of the Radnor Winston Improvement Association and we're opposed.
Thank you very much. Let's see. One, and I think that is, I don't see any other chats. So I think that's it. So we will move to the rebuttal. So Mr. Lanzi, I'll make you a panelist in 2 seconds. And Mr. Lands, if you could tell me who else you would like to, for me to make a panelist.
You could make Vaughn Green, it may be under Bill Miller, probably under Bill Miller.
Okay.
Then
Yeah.
you want to do one at a time, I assume?
All right, hold on one second. So Mr. Miller, I've made you a panelist. You're unmuted. And I'm assuming Mr. Green is with you.
That's correct.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Mr. Landsey, anybody else?
Okay, it'll be Michael
Do you
Tricoche.
need to do anything as far as a photo?
Tree coach,
Video.
okay. All right, Mr. Tree Coach, you are also a panelist.
And last one will be Dr. Kinslow.
Okay. And Mr. Kinslow, Ms. Kinslow, you are also a panelist. So now you all have the ability to unmute yourselves and to show your camera. But I would ask, because WebEx is such a temperamental thing, that if you are not speaking, that you remain muted so we don't have a lot of overlap. Perfectly fine keeping cameras on if you want, keep during someone else's presentation or testimony.
Tricoche.
All right, so do you need me to unmute Mr. Tricoche?
We're going to start with Vaughn Green, who's with Bill Miller. You can start
Okay.
here first. Is my video not working? Oh,
I
sorry.
do not see you, and I do not have the option of,
There we go.
there we go.
Yeah.
And before I ask Mr. Green some questions, I just wanted to make sure that the board did receive what we filed as Exhibit 17.
Yes, I forwarded that via email to the board yesterday. I believe everyone has gotten it.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. We've got it. We're good.
And then just a couple other things. I think it was day 2, the chairman asked a question of someone, and I'm not sure who, just kind of the timing of the permits for the other 3 crematories. And it is in petitioner's Exhibit 11. Bayview was in 2000 with the renewal in 2017. The Joe Brown when Fulton was in 2016, and the Loudon Park was in the 1990s with a renewal in 2018. Just so you have that. And then I wanted to proffer, I'm trying to proffer where I can just to expedite this. William Vines. William Vines had testified as an expert architect, and there was a question raised during the protestant's testimony about the bell tower and the safety with regard to the heat that's emitted. And I would proffer that he would state the bell tower and all the materials certainly meet fire code and are completely safe. That would never be approved otherwise. Just to save, to have to call him back to ask that one question. And with that, I will turn to Mr. Green if he's there.
I am.
Okay, I guess his camera is not working. Okay, so Mr. Green, one thing I wanted to clear up, right away, if you don't mind, there was a comment just made that for the first time you were indicating that the family of the deceased would be coming not only from the York Road, but also the other 3 locations. Isn't it a fact that you have been clear from the MDE informational meetings to the informal community meetings and your testimony that that was your intention?
Correct.
Maybe it was confused. And your testimony was there would be no outside companies bringing deceased to your location for cremation.
Correct.
Sorry for the long-winded question. Is that correct? You've been consistent that it's been?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to straighten that out first. All right, Mr. Green, you've heard testimony from the opposition on day 2 of the hearing and today, with a constant use of the term incinerator or incineration, and how do you respond to that?
I've tried to accept what's been said based on the information that has been put out there, because some persons who are on the side of my opposition, that's how they have presented what I'm proposing, that it's an incinerator. You have actually heard them testify that they've sent emails or they've gone door to door letting people know that there is an incinerator coming to their community. To be totally honest with you, Neil, if I lived in the community and somebody told me that there was a trash disposal business or an incinerator business coming, I may be opposed, but that's not what I do. Incinerators are for trash, garbage, refuse, things that don't have value, things that people no longer want, things that people don't want back. I'm not an incinerator. I'm not proposing to bring an incinerator there. Incinerators aren't even permitted in Baltimore City, but there are 3 crematories in Baltimore City, and that's simply because a crematory is not an incinerator, because we don't cremate trash. I've never had a family, Neil, come to me and say, please go and get my mother from Johns Hopkins Hospital and get rid of her for me. What I do provides not only value for the people that call my services, but I return value to them. You don't take trash on the 9th hole of Mount Pleasant and Clifton Park and pour it out on the 9th green and then celebrate it later. You don't do that with trash. You don't take trash to church and bring people in to celebrate that life. You don't. It's depressing to hear what I'm proposing to do presented that way, because I give back value to the people that call my services. People who call me for for crematory services, Neil, they don't call a trash disposal company for those types of services. They call a funeral home because it's a part of the funeral business. And to have my ministry described as an incinerator is, it's insulting, but I'm not insulted by the community, because I know they're simply responding to the misinformation that has been presented to them, and so I get it, but I hate the fact that that my work, a lifetime of work, has been presented that way, or misinterpreted or misrepresented that way. I'm not an incinerator.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Now, you've also heard some statements over the first couple of days of the hearing that you and your consultants, including myself, are all outsiders with no connections to this community. How do you respond?
Neil, I was born in East Baltimore, right off of East North Avenue, about a 12-minute drive from my York Road location. I'm involved on boards in East Baltimore. I support little leagues. I support community events. I support community projects in East Baltimore. I am at my York Road location every day. It's sometimes, if you ask my spouse, I spend more times at work than I do at home. So to suggest that I am an outsider in the community where I spend significant time serving, and not only serving, but seeding into that community, I'm not an outsider to East Baltimore.
And when you say East Baltimore, you're including the York Road location as within the that area as well, correct?
Absolutely. And again, I grew up, I was born and raised 12 minutes from my York Road location, right off of East North Avenue.
Got it. So with regard to the York Road plan, I believe Senator mentioned, and there's been testimony on the other days, how does your business and your cremation plan, crematory plan fall within its goals? Did we lose a connection? I think he's muted.
Yeah, I can't mute or unmute him.
Okay.
So something has happened on the other end.
Okay, I can check on that. Make sure.
Yeah, Mr. Miller is still a panelist, but the speaker button is gone.
Let me go just next door. I'll go take care of it.
Okay.
Ms. Byrne, they are having technical difficulties. If you'd like to give me the call-in number, I'll have Mr. Green call in.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay, I'm ready.
That's something I need to find. Hold on one second.
Okay.
You would think I would have that handy. Let's see. Let me go to my calendar. So the call-in number is 408 418 9388.
Is there any code or anything?
I'm going to give you the access code just in case it asks you for it. It's 179 810 2147.
179-810-2147?
Correct.
Okay.
And I will look for the next call-in user. All right.
Okay.
I think I still.
Hopefully you'll hear from him shortly.
All right, he should just pop up in order. So I'm keeping my eyes open for the on the attendee list. Here we go. I have a call-in user number 10, which I believe is him. Mr. Green?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
Great.
Apologize for the technical difficulties.
It happens. It's okay.
All right, Mr. Green, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Great. So the last question I asked was, what's your or is it your understanding your business plan for the crematory falls within the goals of the York Road plan?
To the letter, I think the things I've seen in the York Road plan concerns diversity and support for diversity and minority businesses. I certainly qualify. I provide a service that people are requesting. Again, people call and ask and request these services. If I can't provide the services that people ask me for, then I become irrelevant. So to suggest that you want to help businesses grow, but at the same time not allow me to provide the services that the community is asking me for so that I can remain competitive and relevant and continue to provide value to the community. I have a very nice facility that's well maintained. I have green space located at my facility. Everything that they said that they're looking for in terms of a business that reflects the York Road long-term vision, those are things that I provide. Now, again, the fact that I am in the funeral business or the death care industry makes people uncomfortable. But if we could drill down past those things in terms of the what I actually provide and what I actually present to the community, it's right in line with what they say they want for in terms of long range or the York Road Partnership. So I think I ring the bell in terms of the type of business and the type of service I provide.
Okay, thank you. Next question. You heard the opposition's expert talk a lot about the trucks and the vehicles on York Road, the fast food restaurants, the York Road plan, which we just talked about, and the fact they don't want any more potential pollution emitting businesses. But have you observed any new restaurants along York Road since the implementation of the York Road plan?
Yes, absolutely.
Are you aware of any protests to those businesses?
Not just one, but multiple restaurants. So I guess you can consider that. I don't know if you consider it fast food but yeah, multiple businesses, multiple restaurants that produce carbons have opened since I put my application in.
You're aware there are 3 other crematories in the city, and you recall those crematories having organized opposition or having articles in newspapers and legislative leaders speaking?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, Mr. Brown is my colleague, and the persons that run the other 2 crematories in Baltimore, those are people that I attend association meetings with, funeral director conferences with. I've never had anyone tell me that they've gone through what I'm going through currently to provide the services that their community is asking them for, if that answers your question.
Yes. Now, you've also heard testimony that the letters, I think there were some charts shown, that the letters that we submitted from the various pastors and ministers in support of your crematory, those churches have no tie to the Govans community. And how would you respond to that?
There is only one letter that is from a church outside of East Baltimore, and that is because that's the church where I belong, and that's a letter of reference from my pastor. The other churches are located in East Baltimore. And then secondly, all of those churches, including the church that I'm a member of, have members that live in 21212. So I'm not, if they're asking all those churches located right there on York Road, no, but neither are the community associations that are opposing it. They're not necessarily located in my immediate geography either. But the churches that have taken the time out to pen letters and pen a recommendation are churches that are in the East Baltimore geography, and all of those churches have members that live in 21212.
Okay, thank you. Last question. There's been some concerns about compliance with any type of restrictions that MDE may impose upon you. Would you and your company, your funeral home, be willing to comply or work with any limits, any conditions that MDE may place on the air quality permit if it is in fact issued?
Neil, absolutely, and again, you and I and Mr. Miller, we've addressed this with the community before. I don't know if the members that represent the zoning board know this, but this is not the first time that we brought expert witnesses out. We didn't just bring these people out to bring them before the zoning board. We brought them before the community during the community meetings so that they could ask questions, so if they had concerns. The toxicologist that's testifying today, everybody that's testifying have testified in front of the community, giving them an opportunity to ask questions. As a matter of fact, Senator Mary Washington chaired one of the meetings where we had persons that were available to answer questions. I think we've done everything that we know how to try to make the community comfortable with being able to provide in-house the services that the community is asking for. So to answer your question again, absolutely, whatever I have to do, I want to be a good neighbor. And even though we might not be seeing eye to eye right now, you've heard the people testify to my character and to the quality of service I provide and the value that I provided to the community over the last 21 years. These persons aren't my enemies. They're people that I worship with. They're families that I serve. Some of these people are friends.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. That's all I have for Mr. Green, unless the board has questions. I will call, are there any questions?
No.
Okay. I would call Michael Tricochet next.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello, I've just muted Mr. Green, so we're good.
Thank you. Mr. Tricochet, and hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. I have trouble for some reason.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Could you briefly give your background for the board, your expertise?
Yes, sir. I work for Matthews Environmental Solutions. I am an electrical engineer for them, and I've been with the company for 11 years.
When did you get your engineering degree?
I got it in year 2000 from University of Puerto Rico.
I'm going to offer Mr. Tricochet as an expert electrical engineer. I don't believe his resume was in the package that we submitted, Exhibit 3.
Okay, submitted.
Mr. Tricochet, did you assist Vaughn Green with their air quality permit application?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you're aware there's some concern by the community, I think it was even raised again today, that the air quality permit application lists that the machine will run for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Can you explain how the application process works?
Yes, I am aware. So, the first and foremost, to ask your question about the 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, the cremation unit or a cremation unit does not run continuously. It is really an intermittent use. What that means is that the cremation process is one body at a time. You have a body to cremate, you turn on the machine to preheat the machine. Then once it's preheated, you insert the the particular body to be cremated, the cremation process unfolds, and then once the cremation time for that particular body ends, all the burners of the machine will turn off completely, and the unit will go into its cooling mode to be able to remove the cremated remains out of the machine. And once the cooling time has expired, the machine will shut off completely, meaning that it's not in operation. That way, the operator, that way the remains can be removed from the machine. And then if there is another body to be cremated, then at that point, the machine will be turned on again, and it will go through the process again. So, so the machine does not, once it turns on, it doesn't run continuously for X amount of time. It is an on-off somewhat process, right? Okay. So the when it comes to the MDE process, one of my responsibilities at Matthews is that I assist all of our customers from all over the United States in providing the application forms and technical information so that they can apply for the air permit for a cremation unit. Any facility that would like to install a cremation unit, they need to apply with their local environmental agency for an air permit. So so when it comes to MDE, the way the process, the way that they do the process, and it's the same process for all customers all of our customers in Maryland, including Von Green. The first thing is that there's a particular set of forms that the MDE have advised to be used in order to apply for an appointment for a cremation unit, right? And cremation units are used solely and only for pathological waste type 4, which in other words, it's only for human and or pet remains. That's what pathological waste implies. So so the application forms, what we do is that we assist in providing the technical information that will go into the forms and provide the supplemental technical information that the MDE is gonna need to do their review and analysis. So once we do that, we mail the application forms to the customer, and then they would have to finalize completion and just by putting their information on their business, contact information, and signatures. And once they do that and provide you know, documentation that the MDE might provide, like zoning letters or plot plans or things like that, that is particular to their business, with the technical information that we provided of the machine, that would be submitted by the customer. In this case, Von Green submitted all that packet to the MDE. If MDE, once they receive it and they review the documentation, if they deemed it complete, then they will continue with the approval process, review and approval process of the forms and information, and which includes public meetings, and that's where we are kind of sitting now, right, in the public meeting process. So so the MDE does have the application forms from Von Green. They have deemed it complete, and they started already the review process, and that's where we are. Hopefully all that information kind of answers your question, sir.
All right, just to follow up a little bit. So the application that was actually filed does indicate it is for the cremation of human remains, correct? There's not going to be any animals or pets.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In one of the line items of the forms, it asks what is the type of service that the facility will do, or that the customer will do, and we emphasize that it is a cremation of human remains. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And you mentioned we're kind of in the public meeting stage, but it didn't, in fact, MDE actually already had their informational meetings with the community or whoever was interested over the winter. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
And they would not have proceeded, I guess, last June when the application was filed without a zoning approval letter. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that zoning approval letter was provided in petitioner's exhibit 14. Although we're here to get additional zoning approval before the board. Okay, make sure I'm clear. So the application, is that more to give the MDE a kind of a concept when you say 12 hours? I mean, what does MDE ultimately typically do as far as any type of conditions or hours or whatever it is that they would restrict? How does that work?
Yes, sir. So the hours of operation, it's one of the line items of the application forms. It lists how many, what will be the estimated hours of operation of the facility, and that usually is it's used in order to be able to calculate potential emission potential to emit of the machine. That does not mean that the machine will run 12 hours a day continuously, because the machine doesn't do that. You don't do that with cremation units, like I mentioned earlier. But the hours of operation that are stated in the application forms is just so that we can be able to provide some potential to emit calculations of emissions that the MDE is going to use for their analysis.
What's an example of what MDE typically would do as far as the hours or conditions that they might, how many cremations in a day or given time frame?
Yes, sir. So all of that information will be in the approved ERP permit. So once MDE does the review, all the review and all the analysis of all the technical information for that particular customer. So that they would, in the air permit, there would be conditions of that they would say how many cremations the customer would have to do in an 8-hour day or in a year. So the MDE, for example, the MDE could say after they do an analysis that the business would be limited to do, for example, 4 cremations in an 8-hour day. And because it's in the air permit, that is something that the customer would have to comply with. Anything that the MDE establishes as a condition or a requirement in the air permit, those are things that the customer would have to comply with in order to operate their cremation unit.
An example, in addition to the condition you just mentioned, do they sometimes, or do they typically order the removal any types of plastics? You've already heard Mr. Green testify that they're going to remove all amalgamants before, cremation. Are you familiar with some of the other conditions they might order?
Some of the conditions would include that they would specify that the machine would have to be used only for human cremation. It cannot be used for anything else. It would mention about some monitoring requirements. What they would have to. They will say about the temperature that the secondary chamber will need to run during the cremation process. They would talk about plastics should not be placed inside the cremation unit, cannot be cremated in the machine. So the MDE has they do a really in-depth analysis or review of the application forms, and all that is shown in the air permit. Like one of my coworkers, Jeff Barron, mentioned that Maryland is one of the states that really take a lot of pride in reviewing and doing one of them. They're really stringent in their requirements, and they're very concerned about the environment. So and that is shown in the air permit that they tend to provide.
As your understanding, the MDE follows the EPA guidelines?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, can you explain for the board the disbursement modeling with regards to what MDE asks for in an application?
Yes, one of the technical documents that the MDE requires for their analysis is that they have a spreadsheet that MDE created that calculates potential to emit for various pollutants, and one of them is mercury. And and it's called a toxic tool, and that is created by MDE. In order for that toxic tool to calculate potential to emit, you have to provide some type of dispersion model. The dispersion model would take information like the proposed stack height of the machine. It will ask for building dimensions and other types of information, and then the result of that dispersion model will give you a potential concentration at a certain point. MDE has advised that concentration is placed or is inserted into the toxic tool spreadsheet that MDE created, and then that concentration or that spreadsheet will auto-populate what would be the potential of emission of various pollutants, and it is a fail-pass spreadsheet. If it shows the word fail, you have to redo the dispersion model until the concentration meets or complies with MDE requirement, which makes the toxic tool pass. And that information was provided with the application forms to MDE. If the MDE doesn't have, or the application form doesn't have that information, MDE will absolutely not review the application forms, and they will ask for you to provide that.
And your company will be dealing with MDE when it comes to any more information that's needed. Is that correct?
Yes. If the MDE contacts any of our customers, or if they would have contacted Von Green, we always ask Von Green to kind of relay that message to us, right, so that we can provide the proper assistance.
But right now, it's on a hold pattern with MDE pending the outcome of the zoning case. Is that your understanding?
I'm sorry, sir?
Right now, MDE is in a hold pattern. They have not gotten back to you or Von Green.
That is correct.
The zoning.
That is correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure. See if there's anything else. Okay, you've heard some testimony that I guess with the heat the machine generates, that could result in wear and tear. And how does Matthews handle that issue?
Well, when it comes to wear and tear of the machine, we tend to recommend our customers to perform an annual maintenance of the unit, and that annual maintenance is done by our technicians. At that point, when the customer kind of calls us and say, "Hey, it's time for a maintenance," our technicians will go to the site, will inspect the machine top to bottom, and then they will file a report of things that need to be addressed, and then the customer would have to make sure that the machine is well maintained and operated annually. So when the machine is operated properly and maintained annually, this will help in the longevity of the unit, will keep the unit in proper operating condition, and will definitely allow the unit to function safely as per MDE requirements and guidelines.
I think that's all. I think that's all I have for Mr. Tricosha, unless the board has any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. Does the MDE consider proximity of the unit to existing residences?
Mr. Cunningham, I'm really not sure. I would have to review the conditions of the permit or the MDE regulations. Probably that would be something that the MD would have to confirm for you, but at this moment, I am not sure.
Could you try to do that and have Mr. Lanzi forward that information to us?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And Mr. Lanzi, you said, let me see, how did you put it? You said that for the MDE application, you had like preliminary zoning approval, and you're back now for additional zoning consideration, I think. What does that mean?
Well, I think the point I'm trying to make is MDE would not have begun the process without zoning approval. The letter from Jeffrey Veal, zoning administrator, was determined to be sufficient that crematory is part of a funeral home, therefore it was allowed. So MDE processed the application, air quality permit application, had its community meetings. An issue was raised by our opposition a few months ago to, actually a letter was written to Jeffrey Veal. I discussed with Jeffrey Veal and the client what steps we should take. I don't know whether Mr. Veal was going to respond or not, but my client determined, let's resolve this issue rather than hold up MDE from any further. And basically MDE wanted to see further review, which is why we filed the appeal with the board.
So this whole process starts with a letter from Mr. Veal.
Yes. Or we could have had a hearing if we determined it was necessary, but at the time of the application, we did not believe it was necessary, nor did the zoning office. It wasn't until
You could have had a hearing with whom?
you. We could have filed a positive appeal, I guess, a year ago, June, but MDE asked for some type of letter approval from zoning in order to process the application. We obtained that letter based on the zoning, the definition, and the use. That was deemed sufficient by MDE to proceed. And then a few months ago, I guess upon inquiries from the opposition, MDE wanted further information from the zoning office. And at that point, we decided to just go ahead and file our positive appeal, and that's why we're here today.
Ms. Byrne, could you get that letter from Mr. Veal for us, please?
I sure can.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, then I have a question for your witness. Sir, your testimony discussed various aspects of the permitting process and what may result in the ultimate issuance of a permit. But once a permit is issued and the crematory is operational, what mechanism, if any, exists to monitor what the emissions actually are from that site?
Very good question. So the machine has installed on the stack what we called the opacity monitoring system. And what that does is that it monitors continuously while the machine is in operation the opacity of the exhaust gases or whatever is flowing through the stack. How that works is that there's two pieces to this system. There's a light transmitter, and there's just a receiver on opposite side of the stack. So if there's no if the exhaust gases are opaque, it means that there's an issue going on with the machine. But if the emissions are clear, then the machine continues operating. So I'm just gonna put an example for you, Mr. Fields.
Yes.
So the machine is operating and the exhaust gases are clear. And there's no problem because the opacity monitoring system is on and it's always operating while the machine is on. If there is some type of issue that the exhaust gases become opaque, the light that is being transmitted to from the transmitter to the receiver is going to be blocked, and that is going to tell the machine, hey, there is a problem, and the machine automatically will go into an alarm mode. In that alarm mode, several things are going to turn off on the machine, which is it's going to help slow down the cremation, and this alarm mode lasts for 3 minutes. The chamber where the combustion of the gases happen, which is the secondary chamber, is still going to be maintained at the operating temperature that MDE requires to be, but the several things in the cremation chamber are going to be turned off, so to slow down the cremation, which and with that, with the secondary chamber working with the correct temperature, we'll be able to correct the exhaust gases challenge, and then for 3 minutes it will be in that state, and then when the opacity monitoring system detects that the exhaust gases are not opaque, then the machine will, after 3 minutes, if it's okay, the machine will continue operation. But if at the end of those first 3 minutes the opacity monitoring system still sees that the exhaust gases are still opaque, it will add another 3 minutes, until the problem or the situation is corrected. I want to say that the opacity in the MDE establishes in the air permit a specific percentage of opacity that the machine will need to comply with. And that opacity monitoring system, at the time of commissioning, our technicians will calibrate that opacity system to that percentage that the MDE would require.
Thank you. So it seems to have basically a self-regulating component to it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And with regard to the performance of the operation of the machine, are those, does MDE require that those records be provided to it at any point to provide confirmation of the operational success of the machine?
I do not recall verbatim of what the requirements says in the permit, but kind of remembering of what other permits from other customers that we have in Maryland, they do have monitoring requirements and record keeping.
Yes,
And obviously, anything that the MDA establishes in the air permit, the customer will need to comply. So if there's, I don't remember the verbatim, the language that they use, but if a requirement, right, or a condition says something like, you need to monitor the opacity, and you have to do manual recording by visually seeing every so much time the stack for emissions, and at any point we should be able to ask you for those records. You should have them handy. It's not verbatim, but it would be something like that to provide that information, and the MDE will be able to put that in the permit.
Understood. Thank you.
I have another
Yes, sir.
question. Does the Bresco incinerator have devices similar to what you just described?
I'm sorry, Mr. Cunningham, the who incinerator, I'm sorry?
The Bresco incinerator, the city trash burning incinerator.
I am not sure, because they're not one of my, that's not one of our machines. So I can't really answer.
Would that be
question.
typical of what you'd see with any incinerator?
When it comes to cremation units, all of our cremation units would have it, but I cannot talk about other waste incinerators, because that's not something that we built.
I just thought as an engineer you might know, but thank you.
Yes, sir.
I had an additional question as a result of those questions. But it's your understanding, Mr. Tricochet, that the MDE conducts an annual inspection or requires an annual inspection?
I have to verify the condition on the permits. At this moment, I do not recall, but I can verify the conditions of the air permit if they do.
I will proffer to the board, based on my communications with MDE, that they do require an annual inspection at minimum. And also that as part of the submittal, they did want to know the distance between the crematory and the closest residence. And if you see Exhibit 14, you'll see some charts which show the location of the crematory and then with rings around it where the closest residences are. That's my understanding from the process with MDE.
Well,
and also I think there was a question, you know, who's kind of governing this. I believe there is an kind of an overseeing board, whether it's the Board of Mortuary. I can certainly provide that in my memo to the board so that you have that additional information.
that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
All right, that's all I have, unless there, of him, unless there's more from the board.
I think we're good with the witness. Thank you.
All right, next I call Dr.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Lanzi, I don't think we can, I think we lost you for a moment.
Okay, how about now?
I hear you, yes.
Okay.
So Ms. Kinslow, is that who you said?
Yes.
Okay, all right, Ms. Kinslow, you can go ahead and unmute and turn your camera on.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Dr. Kinslow.
Hello.
I'll just again remind the board that Dr. Kinslow was accepted previously as an expert, and I would like to offer Exhibit 17, which is the second supplemental report of findings, as petitioner's last exhibit.
So admitted.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Kinslow, were you listening to testimony of day 2 of the hearing?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so in order to save time and rather than ask you a bunch of questions, I'm just going to ask you how you'd like to respond or how you would respond, which I believe much of it is in Exhibit 17, but if you want to summarize what you wrote, feel free.
Sure. So I'm just going to talk about what I wrote in my my most recent report to the board. And it seems to me that the overreaching question that the board is being asked to consider is if this crematorium air emissions will put the surrounding community in unreasonable danger. The answer is that all the air emission modeling data indicate that the proposed crematorium will be well below the state federal allowable limits, thus will not result in ambient air concentrations that will adversely impact the health of the surrounding community. And being compliant with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, the NAAQS, as well as those set out by the Maryland Department of Environment, MDE, the public health is protected, including the health of sensitive populations. Now let's talk about those air standards because the opposition had a lot of comments about those air standards. Now these air quality standards mitigate risk by mitigating exposure. That's how risk works. You have a hazard and you have exposure, and then the combination of those two is what causes a potential increased risk. So if you eliminate a hazard or if you eliminate the exposure, then you reduce or you eliminate that risk. So the lower the exposure, the lower the potential for risk of disease. There are two ways that these regulations and standards mitigate exposure. One, by limiting the amount a facility can emit, i.e. the permit review process, and by ensuring compliance through actions from the MDE, such as we were just talking about, the auditing process, and as well as air monitoring. And we talked about that, or the opposition talked about that in the last meeting. And we're going to be touching a little bit on that as well. Now, these two actions work together to reduce air pollution. Thus, a reduction in overall air pollution is an indication that the standard is working to reduce the exposure, thus the potential burden of disease. The state and national air data indicate that there has been a constant reduction in the particulate matter 2.5 microns, PM 2.5, at the Old Town Fire Station monitor in Baltimore City. Before and since the current PM 2.5 NACS that was discussed at length in the past meeting has been implemented. National and international data indicates that the same decreasing trend throughout Maryland and the nation since the current NACS has been implemented in 2012. Furthermore, the Old Town Fire Station monitor, located in an area that is has arguably more potential PM 2.5 burden than the York Road location, has been below the United States and United States NACS for 10 years, and Canadian, as well as the World Health Organization standards and guidelines since 2018. Taken together, the permitting data, the monitoring data, the decades of science that have gone into the NACS, and the reported decrease in the PM 2.5 values are well established in the scientific literature, clearly indicate that the current NACS is reducing exposure to PM 2.5 burden. Thus, the standard is doing what it's designed to do, reducing exposure to PM 2.5, and as such, is protective of the community. Some take-home points I wanted to reiterate. And number one, the crematory is a minor emission source and is not expected to put the community's health in unreasonable danger. Other sources in this category in Maryland include barbecue restaurants, gas stations, dry cleaners. Bowling Green has met or exceeded the state regulatory requirements regarding emissions for this piece of equipment. These account for multiple sources and consider sensitive groups. In addition, Green Bond has listened to the community and will remove dental amalgams to effectively eliminate the community concern for mercury emissions from fillings. The observation that the annual PM 2.5 values at the nearest ambient air monitor have exceeded the NACS standard for 10 years and have progressively dropped to values well below the NACS throughout this time, when numerous air permits and numerous businesses have been built and we've had increases in population, that when all that is still happening, that this reduction is an indication that the current NACS 2.5 PM standard is working to reduce the particulate matter burden for the people of Baltimore City. Thus, is protective of their health. Building this crematorium will be in line with environmental goals set forth in the Baltimore City Sustainability Plan with regard to climate and resilience, the clean air section, and that it will reduce car traffic, including idling, and will be using natural gas. Addressing the opposition's comments specifically to this comments and their presentation. During the presentation on August 24th, the opposition agreed, actually, that there's no scientific data, air data, to support that there's any health concern currently in the community in the vicinity of the Vaughn Green Funeral Home. The opposition also agreed that the PM 2.5 monitor in Old Town, at the Old Town Fire Station, 1100 Hillen Street, is in compliance with the United States Environmental Protection Agency NACS PM. And by design and intent, the US EPA ambient air monitors are placed in areas to support human health objectives and in locations with a high potential for gathering meaningful data about air quality. This monitor specifically is located near several major PM 2.5 sources. You can't discount this data. And these sources include major highways, the port, and it's near an industrial area of Baltimore City. As such, the monitor represents a significant 2.5 burden. This is in contrast with the residential area where Vaughn Green is located. And even with being surrounded by these major continual 2.5 sources, the PM 2.5 readings from this monitor have been in compliance and trending down with the NACS since at least 2011. The emissions from the monitor PM source that is in compliance, such as the Green Bond Crematory, should not reverse this trend. The opposition suggested that the traffic along York Road is a reason why the permit should not be allowed. The traffic along the road decreased by 6,000 cars per day between 2010 and 2018 and is on a downward trend. Same for the area roads surrounding Von Green. Furthermore, the EPA, as the MDE is not in charge of changing mobile emission standards, the EPA has continued to implement stricter standards for car emissions. So these emissions from vehicles are becoming less and less. The opposition provided calculations for emissions during idling, yet did not provide the source of rate of emissions. It would be nice to know that because older vehicles emit more in general. Furthermore, when we talk about that Old Town Monitor and we talk about vehicle emissions, the fire station monitor is immediately adjacent to these emissions from the fire trucks, as well as several roads that have as much or more road traffic load than that of York Road, yet the monitor is still in compliance. The opposition suggests the current PM NACS is not protective of health. The Old Town Fire Station monitor has been gathering data since 2011 and has not, as I said, has not exceeded the 2012 NACS since then. The data right now is at 7.9 micrograms per meter cubed and has had a completely downward trend every year since at least 2011. And it's this downward, and with regard to the NACS, this downward trend is consistent nationwide because the NACS, remember, is applied nationwide with a 41% drop in the past 20 years to an average that's below the NACS across the nation. The observation that the annual PM 2.5 measurements in Baltimore, in Maryland, across the nation, where the NACS is being applied, throughout the time when numerous air permits were reviewed and implemented, is an indication that the PM 2.5 standard is working to reduce the PM burden of the people of Baltimore City and across the nation. Thus, it's protective of their health through reducing exposure. Furthermore, the state of Baltimore has been in attainment for PM 2.5, and one shouldn't ignore the current PM NACS was developed over decades through proven methods of science.
Dr. Kinslow.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. What is the basis for the conclusion or the statement that there's been a consistent downward trend from 2011 to today? For example, what data or measure are we looking at real time to obtain that information for the local area?
So we've got the Old Town Monitor.
Right.
Right. So, and that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And in my report, I've got the reference there. It's from the EPA. It's the EPA website for monitors, and you can go there yourself, and you can. It's got a great map. There's an interactive map where you can go in and you can identify Baltimore City, and you can literally click on it, and you can look at the design values for and the current monitoring values for that location.
Okay. And is this updated annually? Every year?
Actually, yes, it's definitely updated every year. There is now the AQI and other tools that the EPA have provide a daily evaluation, and even prediction of your air quality. Then, so there's opportunities to get more recent data than just annual.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. The MDE also has a link to the EPA site, and then the MDE has information about that as well.
Very well. Thank you.
Sure. The opposition referenced the 2017 State of Global Air Report issued by the Health Effects Institute. So this report is updated yearly, and although the 2020, I couldn't pull it up. It doesn't. It's not posted, I don't believe. But the 2019 was available, and what was nice about that was it indicated that the United States had made the most striking reduction across the countries that they evaluated. And with the number of people that were living in the PM 2.5 value areas that were above the more stringent World Health Organization value of 10 microns per meter cube. And so the United States went from 50% in 1990 to 3% in 2017. The most striking difference here was between 2010 to 2017. The current NAAQS was established in 2012, and we went from 40% to 3% of people that were in the United States that were living in PM 2.5 above the more stringent World Health Organization value. And importantly, that 3% doesn't include Baltimore City, because Baltimore City, remember, is at 7.9%, which is below that. So they're not within that 3% that still remain within the above the 2.5 value. I'm sorry, above the World Health Organization PM 2.5 standard. Now so this is all during a time when, again, the country was booming, we had businesses growing, we had permits being reviewed, we had more and more businesses and people in these areas. So even though all this was happening, we were still seeing a downward trend of PM 2.5. Now, when comparing the US PM NAAQS to other standards, I looked at several. And the ones that we like to, as toxicologists, we like to look at World Health Organization, and we like to look at places that are close to us that we have a lot of confidence in their science. And one of them is Canada. And Canada has produced a more recent, a 2020 PM 2.5 standard for Canada. And it is actually at 8.8. Notably, Baltimore City is still below even the Canadian most recent PM 2.5 values, and has been since 2018. Okay, so the opposition, they're still in compliance even with more strict standards. The opposition suggests that the PM 2.5 standard may be changed in the future. The EPA stated that the final re-review that they mentioned towards the end would be available in 2023. So 2 years from now is when we'll know what that evaluation will look like and what their conclusions might be. It's been my experience working with the EPA for almost 5 years that once they have that reassessed, it'll take another period of time, conservatively about a year, before they make a decision on the values. Regarding the PM 2.5 2012 decision, we were arguing and discussing that as early as at least 2008 when I joined the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And so that discussion, those arguments continue on, and that's very common for the toxicologists, environmentalists, and environmental scientists to discuss these NAAQS on a continual basis. So the Old Town Fire Station monitor is in attainment right now, and so for it to be out of attainment, you'd have to drop the NAAQS by 25%, which would be below the World Health Organization guidelines as well as the Canadian guidelines. The last point here before summing up, the ABLE study is a non-peer-reviewed study, body of work that was supported by the ABLE Foundation and published by the ABLE Foundation. My comments regarding the study during the August 10th hearing were clearly regarding the environmental triggers that the study points to regarding disparity of asthma prevalence between Baltimore City and the rest of Maryland. There is a clear intent in this body of work to focus on understanding this disparity. None of the proposed promising approaches that they recommend in this study involve ambient air. Thus, my comments were and remain accurate. So taken together, the data supports that the NAAQS PM 2.5 standard is doing what it's intended to do, protecting public health through the reduction of exposure to hazard. And that's what the permittings that we're talking about, that's what it's based on, as Mr. Tricochet mentioned. And that's what MDE is going to be looking at, along with the rest of their data. The monitoring data indicates that the Baltimore City area has been compliant with NAAQS for over 10 years and does not indicate excessive values, even in an area where PM 2.5 burden is relatively high. The crematorium is considered a minor source, such as a dry cleaner or barbecue restaurant, and when in compliance will not cause deterioration of the air quality in the area. And being compliant with the primary NAAQS, the public health is protected, including the health of the sensitive populations. And that ends my
Thank you. I have a few questions, follow up. All right, so if I heard you correctly, as you just reported, there'll be no negative health consequences from the crematory at this location, as long as the cremation equipment is operating properly and is in compliance with the MDE permit. Is that correct?
as long as it's in compliance with the permit, yes.
Okay. Now, I also wanted to confirm what you said previously, that it would be your opinion that the adverse effects, or let me start off with this. You may or may not have heard me talk about the standards. I believe I did with Mr. Doak. We talk about the standards that the board has to consider when making its decision regarding the crematory. And the standards have to do with conditional use, which is why we're here. And conditional uses have inherent adverse effects, and so, but they've been approved by the legislator. So my question is it your opinion that any inherent adverse effects from this crematory, they would not be above and beyond or unique to this neighborhood based on the data and information that you have?
That is correct. It would not be.
Okay. And that would be going back to your first day of testimony when you kind of extrapolated the map of the protestants' exhibit, showing different areas of vulnerable citizens in the city. Is that my recollection correct?
That's part of it, yes.
Okay. And if I also heard you correctly, would it be your opinion that the MDE guidelines are designed to protect the health of citizens?
Yes.
Okay. And if the air quality permit is issued, strike that. Unless you have anything else or the board has any questions of you, that would be.
I have a couple questions. Ms. Kinsler, where did you get your information on the decrease in traffic? Was it from our DOT?
I've got it referenced in my report. It was the Maryland State agency. I'll have to look at that.
State of Maryland? Not the
Yes.
DOT? Okay.
I've got
so
it in there.
You deal with air quality issues, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It is the BMC.
What?
In a response, I'll find it in there. It's in just very little letter, so I'll find it for you, Mr. Cunningham.
Okay, thank you. So you're an expert in air quality issues, right?
I'm a toxicologist in environmental toxicologist. Yes.
Okay. Do you monitor, like large incinerators?
I personally don't. That's not part of my job. No, I evaluate the data from monitoring data, monitors and monitoring data with regard to potential for human health effects.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Ms. Byrne. were the other three crematoria in Baltimore City permitted under the old code or the new code?
I'll have to look at that. I believe Mr. Lanzi, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was Serenity was one crematorium and the other one was Greater Baltimore Crematory. And
I have them down as Loudon Park would have been first in the 1990s. The Joseph Brown was in 2016, so that was under the old zoning code. And the Bayview was in 2000 with the renewal in 2017. And I don't believe a renewal of a permit would be subject to zoning. It's
correct.
subject to MDE.
Correct.
So all three would have been pre-new zoning code.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further of Dr. Kinslow, I just wanted to do a kind of a summation, and I believe we can be finished.
Okay.
I'm good.
Could I have like a 3-minute break before I proceed?
Certainly.
Okay. Back.
So more than likely, under the old zoning code, crematoriums weren't necessarily defined. It would have been accessory to an already existing funeral home use, so it would not have come to the board.
I looked it up, Katie. It actually only is included in cemeteries under the old code,
Under the old code, okay.
not under undertakers, which is the old code word for funeral home.
I actually knew the answer to my question, but thank you.
I've emailed Mr. Veal for a copy of the zoning verification letter that he issued originally, so I'll forward that to you all when I get it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for giving me that little break.
Problem.
All right, let's see. Just a couple administrative stuff I wanted to make sure. So I believe all the exhibits that we presented are in. And that would be 1 through 17. Is that what your records show?
I believe so. We have the last exhibit was today's submission of Dr. Kinslow's supplemental.
Yes, that would be the last exhibit. And then I also wanted to confirm, without going back to all the testimony, that all the experts or all the witnesses that I presented as experts were in fact accepted by the board as experts, starting with Dr. Kinslow, Bruce Stoke as the land use surveyor, Doug Bimes or William Bimes as the architect, Richard King as a real estate expert, and then Michael Tricochet as electrical engineer. I believe that covers. Were they in fact accepted by the board?
Yeah, if the record doesn't reflect that, then we can clarify it now.
Okay.
Been so admitted for the.
Okay. And before I start my closing, one other proffer, also to save some time for the board. And I'll offer Robert Batthurst, who has not testified. He's an engineer with Century Engineering, civil engineer. I believe the testimony was that he would have spoken to was essentially covered by Bruce Stoke, our land use expert. But he did provide me some information, which I'd like to proffer to the board. And Mr. Batthurst's resume is in Petitioner's Exhibit 3, I believe, with all the other resumes. But the information he gave me is that there are, I guess there's a medical waste incinerator, Stericycle. I think it's STERI cycle, which is Stericycle and LabCorp, which I'm sure most people have heard of, deals with medical waste. And the Stericycle Medical Incinerator is located in the city near their landfill. I just wanted to throw that out there. All right. So as far as closing, first I wanted to thank.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Why did you bring up the medical waste incinerator?
You're going to hear it in a second, because there was a lot of talk about incinerators, and I will explain. If you'll bear with me, I think I'll answer your question.
I'm listening.
In a few minutes. Okay. So I wanted to first thank the board again, especially for setting this in when an off day for you guys. I've been doing this for many years, and I don't remember this ever happening. So thank you. I'm not going to go through all the exhibits. You notice I haven't shown anything on the screen. I won't do that. You all have them. They speak for themselves. I do want to highlight a few of the some of the items that are in the memorandum that I've already filed in support of our position. I realize I'm going to file a supplemental. And then I want to respond to some of the arguments that were made by the protestants on day 2. First, as I'm sure the board has noted, the petitioner is fully aware that the air quality permit application and the zoning appeal certainly have generated strong feelings on both sides in the community and beyond. And Vaughn Green Funeral Services also include M&G Property Management too. That's the property owner. I'll call them Vaughn Green in general. They respect these concerns of the neighbors and the residents, the community associations, and they certainly have not dismissed them. When they filed, I believe it was June of 2020, and actually prior to when they filed the air quality permit application in June of 2020, and then once the MDE process started, numerous meetings were had, whether they were conference calls, Zoom meetings. Some were required by MDE, some were not. I think consistently Ms. Vaughn Green has tried to be available for the community. In fact, you heard testimony today that they met with another association after day 2 of the hearing, 7 o'clock that night. More people wanted information, they provided it. So, you know, they certainly have not tried to, they've tried to be transparent through the whole process. I've listened, I think the clients have listened, you all have listened to all the concerns of the community and the opposition. You know, there is a concern that they're being kind of run out of this area when all they're trying to do is keep up with their competitors and meet the demands of their customers. I would like to emphasize just basic facts and take the emotions out of it. Some of this, hopefully this won't come across the wrong way, but the zoning regulations and the zoning code, as the board knows, that's prepared by the city council, the legislature. I believe it was called, the current code was called Transform Baltimore. I actually was involved in parts of it. Over the 10 plus years during the drafting, there were various hearings. Ultimately, the city council approved it. I do remember dealing with the Department of Planning during the drafting, and I believe they were pretty involved as well. And I think that's an important fact because the Department of Planning does not object to the zoning relief. And they're certainly familiar with the zoning code. And an argument was made by the opposition that the drafters of the zoning code intended for a crematory to simply not be allowed in Baltimore City. I would argue a misguided equation of a crematory as an incinerator. I agree with my colleague that the code provides guidance in the event of a conflict between provisions, but it's my position there is absolutely no conflict. With regard to the use of the incinerator, and this will address your question, Mr. Cunningham, the incinerator term was convenient, in my opinion. What I observed was rather conveniently and purposefully repeated over and over, almost like a political ad. I guess to the point that people would, you know, think it's accurate. You heard Mr. Green I believe in a reasonable way, indicate he was concerned that people were going door to door with what could be construed as misinformation. So I believe the board could almost take judicial notice or just using common sense. Human crematory is not the same as an incinerator. An incinerator burns trash, crematory burns human remains. Human remains have value, especially to the family. That's why I said what I did at the end of day 2, hearing day 2. So I would like to just briefly proffer for the board, because I looked into the regulations and some of the history. And that's because of this theme coming from the opposition that a crematory is an incinerator. That will cause harm to the neighborhood and as a result will result in adverse health effects. I looked at old regulations. You've heard that the funeral home property was zoned, or maybe you didn't hear this, it was zoned B-2-2 and R3. So it wasn't a business zone prior to the new code. And the funeral home in the B-2-2 zone was a by right use. We had a hearing in 2008 because the back of the property was in the residential zone and they needed to use that area for parking. So we needed to come to the board for that. And so the board approved that. When the Transform Baltimore Council Bill 12-0152, the new zoning code, was approved, it updated the definition of a funeral home. So under the old code, crematoriums fell within the definition of a cemetery. And as I was taking a few-minute break, I thought I heard someone mention that fact. So crematorium was within a cemetery but they were allowed as a conditional use, subject to board approval. So I believe they should have had hearings before the board. The funeral parlor was a permitted use under the old code. Now, this is the interesting part. The former code does not reference incinerators, except in their table of uses. You know how the code has a table at the end, and even in those tables, they're only in the M3 commercial industrial districts. And they discuss municipal incinerators or commercial incinerators, which would address your question about that huge incinerator downtown. And those were only allowed by conditional use ordinance. So you needed an actual ordinance from the city council. Under the new code, funeral homes considered a conditional use, which includes a crematory as part of the definition. So technically we're here, funeral homes by right, which is probably why Jeffrey Veal issued the zoning approval letter back in June of 2020. And that allowed the air quality permit to begin. Now, MDE has regulations with standards for commercial incinerators compared to crematory. But if you just look at I just wanted to get to the bottom of this. So I looked at Merriam-Webster definition of incinerator. An incinerator is a furnace or a container for incinerating waste materials. Again, this is human remains, which would be taken as a great insult to the families of the deceased to compare human remains as waste. When you look at the Maryland Annotated Code, I'll put all of this in my memo to the board. Section Health General Article Section 5-508. Definition of a cremation is disposition of a dead human body by means of incineration. Then you look at the Annotated Code Business Regulation article, defining cremation as process of reducing human remains to bone fragments through intense heat and evaporation, etc. Emphasis is on human. If you look at the current zoning regulation for a cemetery, land use dedicated to the burial of the dead, under that definition includes funeral home if operating within the boundaries of the cemetery and a crematorium. As I stated previously, funeral home definition includes an establishment for preparing the deceased individuals for burial or cremation and for conducting rituals before burial or cremation. Funeral home includes chapel and crematorium. So how in the heck would planning and the drafters of the code intend for crematories not to be allowed? Which is why I say the comparison, the conflict just doesn't exist. The definition, you look at the definition of incinerator under the zoning code, which I believe was presented by the opposition. A combustion unit uses controlled flame or a thermal destruction of, here's the key, solid waste, municipal waste, industrial waste, hazardous waste, special medical waste, or sewage sludge. I guess the opposition is trying to equate human remains is special medical waste. You look at the incinerator use under POMAR, Maryland Code of Regulations, and the city code and the state definition state that special medical waste define a hospital medical infectious waste incinerator. So you're looking at medical waste incinerator. It's an incinerator that combusts any amount of hospital medical and infectious waste. Hospital waste defined discards generated at a hospital except unused items returning to the manufacturer. Under hospital waste, the definition does not include human corpses or remains. So without going, I mean, I know I don't want to go to this too much, but hopefully it's clear the incinerator argument is without merit as it deals with municipal solid waste, industrial waste, sewage, sludge. This medical waste does not include human corpses. So why would the city council have included crematories under the definition of funeral home? So the city planning office, city council created the law 2017 providing crematory use on a funeral home. So you're being asked to either ignore the law or create some new law. I'm not sure how that can happen. So we're here because even though the funeral home is existing and is approved, the zoning office took the position that by adding the crematory, you're changing the approved use, so you fall under the standards for conditional use, and that's the standard that you have to apply. And I'll put all this in my memo, but the leading case, Schultz v. Pritz, talks about conditional use, and basically they say it's part of a comprehensive zoning plan. So arguably the city, the 10 years in drafting the zoning code is a plan. It's a plan how, the different properties got rezoned. This is now in a different zone. This property is in a different zone. So the court has said conditional use is part of the comprehensive zoning plan with the presumption as such it's in the interest of the general welfare and therefore valid. And then they compare special exceptions and conditional uses. They're interchangeable. Baltimore County calls them special exceptions. Baltimore City calls them conditional use. Courts recognize in Maryland that conditional uses will have inherent adverse effects. It's acknowledged by the legislatures when they draft them. But they determine their uses are generally compatible with other uses, subject to whether the adverse effect from the conditional use at a particular location will be greater than the recognized adverse effects normally associated with such use, which is really the crux of the case. And the court in the Schultz v. Pritz leading case talked about another case, Anderson v. Sawyer, which happens to involves a funeral home, asking for a special exception in a residential area. And the court in Schultz noted funeral homes are part of the comprehensive plan, allowing such uses, notwithstanding inherent, they use the word deleterious effects. So the courts in the leading cases for conditional uses find if the petitioner is able to show the use can be conducted without real detriment to the neighborhood and would not adversely affect the public interest, the petitioner has met its burden. So it's our position there's no evidence there are any inherent adverse effects from the petitioner's conditional use, which would have any adverse effects upon surrounding properties, unique and different from the adverse effect that otherwise results from a conditional use such as a crematory located anywhere, in Baltimore. So you've heard from Dr. Kinslow. You also heard from Bruce Stoke, the land use expert. The neighborhood is not unique. I mean, it's unique because every neighborhood is unique, but it's not unique regarding the health of its residents compared to other parts of Baltimore. Because when you look at the opposition's own exhibit, it shows that you have health issues throughout Baltimore. All those health issues that were carefully gone through and listed. Just a few more items. Mr. Doak talked about, and I won't go through it because it's in my memo, and I'll put it in the next memo. He went through all the elements or criteria that the board has to go through in deciding whether to grant the relief. So I'm not going to repeat them; they're here in writing. But he did testify in kind of conclusion. It was his expert opinion the installation of the crematory within the existing garage located at the funeral home would not in any way be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, and general welfare of the community And in fact, it would be in harmony, the use is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the code, since it's clearly within the definition of funeral home as contemplated by the planners. So, and I also want to reiterate, they're not tearing down a garage. They're basically retrofitting the existing part of the building where the garage is located. So there will be no expansion to the footprint. And Dr. Kinslow, her report is also in evidence, both her initial and her supplemental. You know, she clearly stated the crematorium, if maintained properly, operated properly, Mr. Tricochet said the same thing. It will not endanger the public health, safety, or welfare. You have MDE monitoring it. You have Matthews monitoring. There are fail-safe protections within the machine itself. I don't think there's one person who said a negative thing about Mr. Green. He cares about his neighbors. He cares about his families that he helps when a family member dies. The last thing he wants to do is endanger. So you can be assured, I think most people would be assured, this isn't a shady character that has a bad reputation. This is a man of great high character. He's a minister, that he's going to make sure his workers maintain this machine. He's going to make sure that if there's something has to be repaired or fixed, he's going to do it. So I think that's why you heard him, I guess, feeling upset that what he's trying to do is presented this way, because it really did. I almost feel like there was kind of misdirection, mischaracterization, you know, things being said that none of these churches are in the neighborhood. Well, all the people that go to the churches are in the neighborhood. I mean, it's just, I'm sure the board sees through it, but it got a little old after a while. And use of the word that automatically makes people think of danger when you use the word incinerator, that was used over and over and over. That was obviously a calculated use of the term, which is why I went into such detail in my argument. Dr. Kinsler's talked about, you know, the misleading information about the emissions in the area. Well, I think today she further clarified it, that you've got vehicle traffic going down. The pollution numbers are going down since 2010. I've already talked about the different areas in Baltimore with asthma, heart disease, lung disease, all that. So really, it's unequivocal testimony that there won't be any adverse effects. So, sure I missed anything. And I believe she testified on the first day that the EPA spent a lot of time coming up with their guidelines. MDE follows those guidelines, and if the guidelines are there to protect the safety of the citizens, and if the air quality permit application is determined by MDE to be in compliance with the guidelines, the crematory is presumed safe. And I think it was made clear by all the experts that Maryland is one of the toughest in the country. So if you're in compliance in Maryland, you're better off than you might be in another state as far as safety protocols. So just kind of to sum up, you've got a 60-year-old business, the last 20 run by Vaughn Green Funeral Services. That's exactly, as you heard Mr. Green testify, that's kind of what the York Road Plan and the Baltimore City Sustainability Plan envision. It's minority owned. It's putting its money in a business in the city, in a community that has employment opportunities for residents. You know, they want to grow. They want to survive, and it's a tough business environment now, and they want to continue to serve the needs. Mr. Green's testimony was uncontradicted as far as trends of cremations have gone up over the years, and in this particular neighborhood, you know, as I said, he's a minister. He would never do anything to hurt his customers. He considers them his family. He conducted a lot of due diligence before to see what would be the best manufacturer to provide the safest equipment. Matthews is state of the art, and he certainly agreed that if there are conditions imposed, which most likely there will be, they will certainly be abided by, and that would probably limit the number of cremations or hourly use in a day. And you also heard testimony that the uncontradicted testimony that the Matthews crematory, when you look at the they run that toxi test, the toxi tool, that the crematory being used by Bowling Green or the equipment will fall well below the minimum. And I believe a question was asked by a board member, maybe the chairman, and this was of the protestants expert. Doesn't MDE have to apply current standards, not standards that maybe someone wants, to be adjusted? And the answer, I believe from the expert, is yes. And so it's petitioner's position that MDE has current standards. The application for the air quality permit meets those standards and is in fact well below those standards. And then you heard Mr. Tricochet today, the Matthews engineer. As long as the equipment is properly maintained, properly used, it will safely operate in accordance with MDE guidelines. I think there might have been a question along the way about setbacks. I'll proffer there's no setback requirement in the current zoning code, but this particular location, or where they decided to locate it, is almost in the center of the site. You'll see that from the exhibits, with about 200 feet to the nearest residence. And I also wanted to make the record clear. Mr. Green, I asked him the question about being an outsider or his team. As he said, his family, he grew up here. I don't know if he said he went to Baltimore City Public Schools. I know various family members all work at the funeral home, and he's there more than he probably should be. And just as an aside, my law firm, Wright Constable and Skeen, is one of the oldest firms in Baltimore City, with our principal office in Baltimore City. I happen to go to school, 2 schools in the area, elementary school and Loyola University. And I also worked at the gas station, one of those 2 gas stations right up the street. I worked there. So just as an aside, there is some contact. There is a connection. And just because the person doesn't living next door doesn't mean, as a business owner, doesn't mean he doesn't care about those that live in the area. Certainly, he's invested in the area. I would defer the remainder of my argument to this to the memorandum I already submitted and what I will be providing to the board. So thank you again for your patience in letting us get all the testimony in and exhibits. And I would respectfully request the board grant the relief requested.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
You're now hearing you go around.
Okay, so Mr. Lanzi, I'm going to unmute you, make you an attendee. And I believe that concludes the hearing today, the special set hearing today. Thank you all for listening in.
How about decision? Decision.
Who's speaking?
I don't know. I thought everyone was muted.
I hear someone yelling decision, but we've discussed
I'm
that
just
with council and
trying to see if I've got somebody here that's not muted.
well, that's okay. We've completed the testimony and we have a schedule and a plan for getting to deliberations.
I have to,
Parties.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I missed almost all of the closing argument. I got knocked out and just came back online.
Well, I can say, Mr. Cunningham, that Mr. Lanzi, basically did a summarization of his counterpoints, but reiterated that he will include those arguments in the memorandum that he would submit within a couple of weeks.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and I'll see if I can find the link for you, Bill, to the Charm TV recording if you wanted to review.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Great.
All right, so thank you all. As was heard at the very beginning of this special set hearing, the attorney for York Road Partnership, the attorney for the petitioner, are going to submit summary memorandum. They're to email them to me by close of business on Tuesday, October 5th. I will in turn email them directly to the board, and the board will then deliberate as part of the general meeting on Tuesday, October 19th, between 12:30 and 1:30. That will be placed, that the deliberation line item will be placed in the general meeting docket on the October 19th docket. And that's it.
Very well. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Have a good day, guys.
Thank you.